Hi, I'm Crow. I'm back with our irregularly scheduled Disability Pride Month programming, and today I am going to be delivering a passionate defense of wheelchairs. This is my wheelchair. My wheelchair doesn't have a name yet. Drop your suggestions in the comments below. So, you might be wondering why I am defending wheelchairs in the first place. Assuming you're not a wheelchair user or have never had to ask a health professional to prescribe you a wheelchair, it seems like there isn't really anything being said against wheelchairs. Um, if you were included in my little caveat there, you know exactly what I'm defending right now. Wheelchairs are, I think, a pretty objectively awesome invention. They allow you to move when your legs would not allow you to move. And that's pretty great, I think. We've also been improving on their designs for an extremely long time, and now we're at a point where a wheelchair can be so compact that it's just about as wide as the person sitting on it, like my lovely wheelchair here. They can be very efficient, they can be very easy to push, and some of them are motorized, which if you have the money to cough up for a motorized wheelchair, is amazing. But wheelchairs do have opposition. What is the opposition? It's everyone, honestly. You know, if you've never been a wheelchair user or tried to become a wheelchair user, it's easy to believe that there's absolutely no one on this planet who would tell a wheelchair user not to use a wheelchair. This is actually such a common misconception that no one would do that, that a lot of questionably educated mental health advocates will be like, you wouldn't tell a wheelchair user to get out of the wheelchair? Don't tell a depressed person not to be depressed. And it's like, well, don't tell a depressed person that, obviously, but yes, they absolutely would. Yes, they would tell a wheelchair user not to use their wheelchair. It happens to me about 3 times a day. Sometimes, actually, the people doing it are those mental health advocates, so that's awesome. So, why do people not want people to use their wheelchairs? Well, there isn't really a good reason. There are some reasons that seem good, and there are a lot of stupid reasons. We're going to start with stupid reasons so that I can devote more of this video to the less ridiculous bad reasons. Bad reason number 1, you don't need it. That is such a subjective opinion, but a lot of people, when encountering a wheelchair user, will just be like, you don't need your wheelchair, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. For example, there's going to be someone who watches this video, sees me moving my legs like so, and comments, you don't need a wheelchair, to which I will say, okay. I still have one, though. It's sort of a follow-up to the you don't need a wheelchair is like, this idea that you're stealing from people by using a wheelchair you don't need. Okay, so here's the thing, though. It's that wheelchairs aren't a finite resource. They're actually kind of the opposite of that. Wheelchairs are often made to order, so however many people want a wheelchair, sometimes that's just how many wheelchairs there are. There are not a lot of circumstances in which one person using a wheelchair means that someone else will not have a wheelchair. And also, the vast majority of people who benefit from wheelchairs don't need them, in the sense that, like, usually one or both of their legs will still move, yeah. The majority of wheelchair users can actually walk. But there are reasons that they don't that we'll get into later. Also, most wheelchair users are part-time wheelchair users, like me. I walk a lot of the time. I use crutches a lot of the time, and I use a cane a lot of the time. Sometimes I use nothing, and then I regret using nothing. One thing to the wheelchairs are finite thing. There are cases in which wheelchairs are finite. Those cases are usually at grocery stores, where they supply wheelchairs, museums where they supply wheelchairs, any event where they supply wheelchairs, honestly. Just like sometimes they'll give you a wheelchair, and they usually don't have an insane amount of those. Those don't usually run out, though. There are actually not a lot of places that supply those wheelchairs that frequently run out of them So, also, most people who need wheelchairs at those places who won't bring their own are capable of waiting like 5 minutes for someone to return theirs. Like it's fine. Another reason that people think people shouldn't be using their wheelchairs is they're setting a bad example by giving up. This is also, I don't think I need to explain why this one's ridiculous. Um, but I guess I will say, using a wheelchair is not giving up. It's like accepting the hand you were dealt and then continuing to do things. Like, if someone who could be using a wheelchair were giving up, they'd be at home. They would be at home. They would not be using a wheelchair. People vastly overestimate how easy it is to be a wheelchair user. Um, on a lot of levels. They overestimate how easy it is, like physically. Like manual wheelchairs aren't really easier than walking unless you need a wheelchair. I can guarantee you, if an able-bodied person were sat in my wheelchair and had to use it for a day, they'd give up immediately. They wouldn't want to. It's not easier, like, emotionally, because people treat you very badly when you're in a wheelchair. And not in the way that they did in that, like, Glee episode, where they just kind of throw slushies in your face or smack you in the face with a bag. It's like slurs, actually. It's mostly slurs. Um, it's mostly slurs and, like, praying, unprompted. Like, they'll just put a hand on your head and be like, "You're cured," and you'll be like, "I'm really not." Also, please don't put your hand on my head. Anyway, so yeah, no, it's not fun. Um, it's not easy to get into places when you have a wheelchair because most places aren't accessible. You can see the video that is going to be popping up in, I want to say, that corner, 50-50 on if I'm right, where I talk a bit about the ADA and how it's not enforced. But at least in the United States, and honestly most places, you just can't get into buildings. Like, they just have stairs, and no one's gonna get rid of the stairs, and people will not help you with stairs. There won't be elevators, and there might be a ramp, but the ramp is too steep for you to safely use it, unless your wheelchair has guard wheels on the bottom to keep you from tipping backwards and cracking your head open. Not all wheelchairs have that. My old wheelchair didn't have that. I almost fell over and had to go to the ER because I tried to go up a ramp in my school. Anyway, not the point of the video. Um, the point of that, though, is it's not easy to get places when you're using a wheelchair. It's really not. It's not easy. And I mean, okay, it's a little fun. People like to sort of combat the idea that people use wheelchairs for fun by saying that using a wheelchair is like hell and that it's never fun. And that's also very wrong. It is fun to use a wheelchair sometimes. Like, do not underestimate how fun it is to be on wheels. Being on wheels is awesome. I love wheels. When my health's doing great, I love to roller skate. I like to drive cars and I like to bike because it's awesome to use wheels. But just like roller skating and biking and using a car, it's less fun to be on wheels when it's not practical. Like, I'm not going to bike up a flight of stairs because that sucks. If I had to use a bicycle all the time, it doesn't matter how fun biking is when I'm on a smooth surface, I'd be miserable. So, like, yeah, it's pretty fun to go downhill in a wheelchair, assuming that you're not going to careen into the street. It's not really fun enough to justify using a wheelchair if you don't need one. Like, it doesn't balance out. But I also don't think that wheelchairs need to be doom and gloom for people to be validated in using them. I can enjoy fun spinny wheel while also having a legitimate disability. The two don't cancel out. So, the less stupid but still kind of stupid reasons that people don't want you to use wheelchairs. These ones usually come from medical professionals who could be more wrong, but also these reasons usually come from medical professionals, and it's a 50-50 on if these medical professionals ever know what they're talking about. And you can send me a comment talking about how arrogant and wrong and bad that is. But as someone who's seen more doctors in the past month than you'll probably see in your entire life, they don't agree on shit. Doctors don't agree on anything, and most of the doctors I've ever seen have to Google what my condition is. They don't know. They don't know anything, and my condition isn't that rare. About 1 in 5,000 people is diagnosed with my main health condition. So, no, but my point is, doctors are wrong very often. And most of the doctors who have said these things are the ones who do not specialize in my health conditions. Shocker. So, reason number one, your legs will get weak. I mean, okay, so here's the thing. Muscle atrophy is a thing that happens. It's real. It's when your muscles shrink and, you know, lose functionality because you're not using them. Here's another thing though. Joint damage is also real, and it's when your joints get damaged because you're using them too much in ways that they cannot handle. We also have this incredible invention. It's called physical therapy, and then also just exercise. These are exercises built to prevent muscle atrophy while not causing further joint damage. These exercises usually do not involve walking when you don't need to. They're usually actually very structured and very impractical to get from place to place. I mean, I don't really think that doing like bicycle kicks is a good way to transport myself. I mean, I guess if I'm riding a bike, but we've already talked about why riding a bike isn't super useful. So, yes, like muscle atrophy is a thing, it's a valid concern, kind of. And it's good to walk as much as you can walk. But as much as I can safely walk is a very different amount from how much I would need to walk if I wasn't using a wheelchair. Those are not the same number at all. And they're not the same circumstances at all. I am the safest walking on grass and uneven surfaces. Walking on concrete is actually pretty bad for my joints. But if I don't use a wheelchair and I'm just going through my day-to-day life, because I don't live in farmland, most of the walking I'll be doing is gonna be on concrete. I can't control that. What I can control is I can, for example, use a wheelchair when I'm gonna be on concrete, and then when I get home and I'm not doing that, I can use the energy I saved by not walking on concrete to go walk on grass, which is better for my joints and better for my muscle health. There's also the idea that using a wheelchair just weakens you overall. And if we're talking about a manual wheelchair, if a doctor ever says this to you, they don't know how muscles work and you might want to find a new one. So I'm gonna flex. My muscles aren't that impressive, but consider that I'm a very scrawny person who basically doesn't exercise outside of pushing myself with mobility aids, okay? So this is what we're working with just from pushing myself with my wheelchair. It's kind of hard to see the difference, I think, but I have a muscle in my arm. That's because pushing your full body weight actually does require some strength. And so I actually have pretty strong arms and pretty strong shoulders. Lesbians eat your heart out. Actually, honestly, I could probably bench press this if I tried hard enough. So I'd put this it's at least 50 pounds. So my point is, I can lift this, you know? It's not even remotely a convenient shape to lift, but I can pick it up. That's because I can push my entire, probably about 170 pounds for hours at a time. And that's what I do. So yeah, using a wheelchair doesn't like make you physically weaker per se. It does change like where a lot of your muscle mass is, but I'm partly using a wheelchair because my legs suck. And actually a huge part of why my legs suck is how long I was forced to go without using a wheelchair. This was for a combination of reasons. It was for not being recognized as having a disability, which, yes, that's a thing that happens. It happens to almost every disabled person, actually. So I spent a lot of my childhood being forced to exercise on the same level as everyone else, despite not having a body that could exercise on the same level as anyone else. Um, not being prescribed a wheelchair, not being prescribed a wheelchair even past the point where it was obvious I needed one.
Hi, editing crow, which is why the angle is terrible. I just want to say regarding being prescribed a wheelchair, because I realize that might not make sense to a lot of people. If you don't have a prescription for a wheelchair, you are paying out of pocket for that wheelchair. My first wheelchair was a really bad one, like as cheap as it goes, and without being prescribed it, it would have cost me $300. And now with my current wheelchair, it would have been like thousands of dollars without a prescription. So, yeah, prescriptions are basically what makes it so that you can afford a wheelchair because they can cost more than sports cars.
When I was finally prescribed a wheelchair, my first wheelchair, it was a very temporary wheelchair, and it was great. It was a really shitty wheelchair that was hell to use, especially compared to this one. But I loved it because it was so much better than walking, because walking was excruciating. But because it sucked, there was a lot of time that I just couldn't use it. So I, kept walking and then I kept exercising, and I wasn't in physical therapy for a very long time. And then I had a lot of pressure on me to just walk as much as possible no matter what so that I could prevent my muscles from atrophying, which meant more and more joint damage. I wasn't diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, my main condition, for a while, even after it was noticed that I had a disability. And one of the main features of EDS, the thing that was not being caught, is that my bones dislocate pretty frequently, actually. If you look closely, you can see that this shoulder isn't in its socket. It's like a full inch lower than the left one. Yeah, that's because my joints can't hold themselves together. But that wasn't noticed. So every time I was walking, I was having joints go in and out of their sockets. And every time your joint does that, it gets more and more damaged. Until it got to the point where, for a period of time, anytime I moved my legs, something would snap out. That doesn't happen anymore because I've done physical therapy and also used my wheelchair when I needed it. But it was a thing. There was a point where my entire kneecap just dislocated and it wouldn't go back for a week. And I had to wear a really heavy knee brace for 2 months straight. And that happened because I stood up from the ground, because my joints were your joints are held together with glue, right? And my joints are held together with watered down paper mache. And every time my joints go out, they just kind of pour more water into the paper mache. So my knee had been going out so often. It had just been going out a little bit every single time, like this. And then eventually I stood up and it just went pop. So basically, the joints in my legs are really fucked. They're pretty badly damaged because of all the times that they've gone in and out of their sockets. But the thing is, I was not forced to walk on my hands. So my arms were not seeing a whole lot of use prior to the point where I was diagnosed with EDS and learned that my joints weren't in their sockets, and learned how to put them back. So most exercise that my arms have ever seen has been the right kind. It's been physical therapy, and it's been very mindful, use of mobility aids, like my wheelchair. So my arms are strong and have minimal joint damage. But the thing is, no matter how strong my legs are, the joint damage is there. And the joint damage will continue to get worse until I properly rest my joints and take good care of them consistently for a long time and possibly get surgery unless I'm lucky. So a huge part of not having worse joint damage in my legs is letting my arms take some of the work. Because the thing is, it doesn't matter how strong your muscles are. If the bottom half of your leg is not connected to the top half of your leg, you can't do shit with it. And, it's been improving, especially since, I've started actually using mobility aids and not letting doctors who had to Google what EDS means dictate what mobility devices I'm using. I use crutches and cane a lot of the time, and my legs can handle that because it, you know, like, takes off some of the weight. And also helps my legs move in a way that's natural for my legs. Because when you're walking on a dislocated joint, you start walking weird. You start walking really weird. And when your legs are forced to bear all of that weight, but they're not fully aligned, they're going to keep walking weird until they have enough support to walk in the way human legs are supposed to walk. So anyway, all that to say, wheelchairs don't make you weaker. They don't really. And electric wheelchairs run a bit more of a risk of like general atrophy, but the thing is, you know, if you're using an electric wheelchair, first off, you probably can't walk as much as I can. Most electric wheelchair users also don't have arms that work like mine do. My arms are pretty much fine, except for the fact that my right shoulder is out of its socket and my hands kind of suck, because I kept using my hands, you know. But you know, I like, I'm buff. I have relatively strong arms, and I'm able to push myself. A lot of electric wheelchair users aren't. Um, but you know, electric wheelchair users are also capable of doing physical therapy, and knowing how much is safe for them to move. So it's the same thing all over. It's just like generally physical therapy is superior to repetitive injury. That's like that's yeah. So that was really rambly. Um Sorry, but I don't know. I felt the need to give an impassioned defense of wheelchairs because they're awesome, and I like them a lot. And you know, like people are shitty about them. Like physical health professionals are shitty about them. My current ones aren't because my current ones are incredible. Which side note, if you're in the GC area and have already maxed out your deductible for this year because you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and that's just how it goes, consider Prism Spine and Joint. Not sponsored. Can you imagine if I got sponsored by an EDS clinic? No, not sponsored or anything. But that's where I go for most of my stuff. A lot of their clinicians actually have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and they're really good at putting my bones back in their sockets and writing me prescriptions I need so that I'm not writhing in pain 24/7. And I like not writhing in pain. I mean, like a little bit of writhing is fun on the weekends, but like, um, so yeah, that's been the video. This isn't our usual content, except for when it is. Um, I promise I'll get back to Plural 101 soon. That's not like dead. It's just been a month. Oh, happy late Plural Acceptance Day. I held an event for that. I'll talk more about it in the next video, because the next video will actually be about plurality. But, you know, July, Disability Pride Month. And also I like my wheelchair. It's cool. I can do a wheelie. Wheelies are actually a really important skill for a wheelchair user. They make it easier to navigate an inaccessible world. Oh, shit. Okay, bye.